Hey guys, Mike here, the Detroit Borg with a look at the brand new OnePlus 8T. So this is the direct successor to the OnePlus 8, which is OnePlus's mid-range phone at $749. This sits below the larger 8 Pro, which is carried over from last year, but does bring some of the Pro features to the mid-range phone. But first, let's get to the unboxing. And as always, OnePlus was kind enough to send this along in a reviewer kit. So this isn't what you'll get when you buy your OnePlus 8T, but it's always fun to unbox these. So the first thing we'll see here when we open up the butterfly box is the reviewer guide. So the reviewer guide gives us some geeky details and some nice illustrations to highlight the major new features of this phone. But below that, we'll find the retail box on the left side, along with 2 optional case accessories. Getting to the retail box, this is pretty familiar territory for OnePlus. We have a pull tab to pull off the plastic wrapping the box, and once we lift open the lid, the first thing we'll see here is lots of paperwork. So it includes a quick start guide, the SAR value, a letter from the CEO, as well as this really cool set of stickers. Now if you want to read that letter, just go ahead and pause the screen. Moving on from there, we have the phone itself, but first let's get to the new charging accessories. This phone debuts with OnePlus's new Warp 65 charger. This is a 65-watt USB-C charger, the first from OnePlus, and can recharge the 4500 mAh battery in this phone from 0 to 100 in only 39 minutes, so that basically eliminates the need to charge your phone overnight. Because this is a USB-C charger, this can also be used with other devices up to 45 watts of charging, and the 8T itself supports up to 27 watts of charging on standard USB-C chargers. So this charger is less proprietary than before, so it's a little less wasteful. So unwrapping the 8T, you can see I have the aquamarine color. I really like this color, but it's also available in lunar silver. So like the previous design, this has an aluminum frame with glass on the back and front, although we don't have wireless charging. The glass on the back is treated with a color that sort of scatters light. So although it's a glossy back panel, it doesn't show fingerprints as easily. So the layout of the phone is pretty familiar for OnePlus. On the right side, we have our power button just below the 3-position alert slider. These buttons are a little lower this time, which makes them a bit easier to use. That also goes for the volume rocker on the left side. On the bottom edge, we have the same layout. We have a USB-C connector with a speaker on one side and the nano SIM tray on the other side. And if you pull that nano SIM tray, you can see the gasket surrounding the tray, which reduces water intrusion. Although this phone does not have an IP rating and doesn't claim to be water resistant. One of the bigger design changes from the 8, besides the new camera system, is a flat screen design. So we no longer have that curved edge. Personally, I'm a fan of moving away from the wrapped screens just because it often led to unintentional presses of the screen. But we still have virtually the same thin bezels all around the phone, which are fairly uniform, although the chin is slightly thicker than the forehead. So one of the big new features of this phone is the upgraded display. So although we have similar specs, a 6.55-inch screen with a resolution of 1080 by 2400, that's good for 402 ppi. But this new display has a max refresh rate of 120 Hz, up from 90 on the OnePlus 8. And that brings it in line with the OnePlus 8 Pro. So that means we get an exceptionally smooth interface. It's definitely very noticeable, especially with an edge-to-edge screen like this. So combine that with the new Oxygen OS 11, the low latency of the OS, and the extreme refresh rate makes for a very smooth operating phone. This is also an E3 panel, which means it's much more energy efficient, but also reduces the amount of blue light it emits, while still preserving full DC-IP3 color gamut support. So basically, this means the display is extremely bright, vivid, and color accurate. In fact, OnePlus says this has a JNCD rating of 0.55, or just noticeable color difference, which is one way to express the technical capability of the display. Also returning is the in-screen optical fingerprint reader, which is also joined by Face Unlock. We get a pretty decent set of stereo speakers with the earpiece and the bottom speaker working together. That earpiece does sound excellent for call quality, and generally speaking, although they're a little thin sounding, they have a nice wide soundscape, so they're pretty immersive. Specs are mostly carried over from the OnePlus 8. That starts with the storage configuration. We get 12 gigs of RAM and 256 gigs of storage, which is pretty generous. Now this is fast UFS 3.1 storage, which is an upgrade from the 3.0 storage of the OnePlus 8. Also carried over is is the Snapdragon 865 7nm chip, along with the Adreno 650 GPU. This also has the X55 modem for 5G support. In terms of synthetic benchmarking, it's very similar to the OnePlus 8, although it seemed to be scoring lower in my initial test. To keep all of this cool, they've upgraded the cooling system with a large vapor chamber, with graphite and thermally conductive silicone grease. So this ensures optimal performance during gaming and other high-demand tasks. One spec that was upgraded is the battery. It's up to 4,500 mAh from 4,300. Moving on to the camera, they have repositioned the module to the corner to allow for better antenna designs. So although most of the hardware is carried over, we do get a new quad camera design. So that includes an ultra-wide angle lens at the top left, followed below that by the main camera, and below that is the macro lens. On the right side at the bottom is the monochrome lens, and above that is the LED flash, and above that is the flicker sensor. So the main camera has the same sensor, the Sony IMX586, which is 48 megapixels with an aperture of f1.7. That also includes optical and electronic image stabilization. The ultra-wide is also carried over with the IMX481. This is 16 megapixels with an f2.2 aperture, but it gains an even wider angle lens, up to 123 degrees from 116. The new macro camera is 5 megapixels up from 2, and they've added a new monochrome lens, which is only 2 megapixels. So unfortunately, we're still missing the telephoto camera that's available on the 8 Pro. Camera performance is predictably excellent in daylight conditions with sharp detail, vibrant colors, and the right mix of contrast and highlights. But even in extreme conditions with the sun right in the camera, the computational magic of this camera can generate some beautiful images that can bring up some of the shadows that would otherwise be blown out. Performance of the ultra-wide camera is fairly consistent with the main camera, at least in daylight conditions, although it's not quite as sharp. Like a lot of ultra-wides, there is some barrel distortion at the edges of the photo, and there is some processing there to help sharpen it up, but you can see it doesn't look quite as sharp as the rest of the image. In terms of low light performance, of course, we have a nightscape mode, which solves a lot of the problems of low light photography and these small cameras. So it's able to bring up the contrast, bring down the highlights, and even out the color so it's not oversaturated. The overall effect looks very good with very little noise, although it does tend to look over-sharpened. Unfortunately, even though the ultra-wide camera is available in nightscape mode, the overall effect is not consistent with the main wide-angle camera. So in many more extreme shots, there's a lot less detail and the color is way more saturated. Video also looks great on this phone. You can record 4K up to 60 frames per second, and you do have a cine mode if you want. Color vibrancy is definitely a highlight of this camera. But one of the other impressive features of this camera is stabilization. So handheld stabilization on this phone almost looks like you're using a gimbal. So it's really easy to get smooth shots out of this phone, even if you're walking around. All right, so let's go ahead and take a walkthrough of this new Oxygen OS 11 Android 11 based interface, which is completely redesigned and I think looks really sharp. So first, let's take a look at the lock screen here. So of course, we have a fingerprint reader to quickly unlock, or we can use face unlock and see just how responsive that is. The first thing that's noticeable right away is that high 120 Hz refresh rate. It's extremely smooth. It's a big difference between 90 Hz and this. 90 Hz isn't as noticeable, but this bit makes a bigger impact. So we can swipe right to get to our Google search, swipe down to get to our shelf. This is where your widgets live. We can also swipe up to get to all of our apps and search the apps as well. Swipe from the top to get to our quick setting toggles and our notifications. Of course, we have gestures here, but you can go back to the standard navigation bar if you prefer. But with gestures, of course, we can go back by swiping left or right from the edge, swipe up to go back home. We can also swipe up and hold to get to all of our recent apps, and we have this little app bar down here. You can see just how incredibly smooth this interface is. Tap and hold to get to additional options such as split screen mode. In terms of the quick setting toggles up top, of course, we do have a vision comfort mode, which reduces the blue light. But more importantly, we have our dark mode. So enable dark mode manually or tap and hold to adjust the automated mode. So you can turn this on automatically with the sunset and sunrise. So the dark mode works across the interface within apps and within the UI. Of course, there's always lots of options here, so tap and hold to get to your wallpapers, and there's lots of colorful options to pick from. We also have our home settings. So we can change the launcher layout. So we do have an app drawer here, so you can see the app drawer and you can disable search history if you want, but you can turn this off and just merge all of the apps onto your home screen. So again, tap and hold to get to your home settings, launcher layout, and home screen only. Click save and it moves everything over to your home screen. You can also change the swipe down gesture. So right now, swiping down brings up the shelf, but if you're like me and prefer to just bring up your notifications, you can also enable that here. So you can select notifications and quick settings, and that turns off the shelf, or you can just disable that gesture if you prefer. Under settings, there's a few key things to point out here. So if we go to buttons and gestures, this is where you can turn on or turn off the navigation bar, or if you're like me and prefer the gestures. You can also hide the bottom bar if you find that redundant. Under display settings, this is where you can turn off the 120 Hz refresh rate. So you can dial it back to 60 Hz, not 90 Hz. So that will give you a conventional refresh rate, which should save some battery life. One of the first things I did change was the screen calibration. It was set to vivid by default, but I prefer advanced AMOLED wide gamut. To me, this looked quite a bit more vibrant. We also have some nice customization options for the status bar, including the icon manager. So if you want to turn off some of these icons, you can do so right here. So in the end, at $749, this is really the sweet spot for OnePlus. Although it's not a bargain by any means, it still has a lot of high-end flagship features for this price. A lot of phones that have this technology cost $1,000 or more, especially with that 120 Hz display. But it's also missing some features that I don't think most people consider to be premium, such as wireless charging. That's pretty ubiquitous now. A lot of people have wireless chargers even built into their cars. So I'm not sure why they're reluctant to add that feature, but it would be nice to check that off the list. Alrighty guys, hope you enjoyed this look at the OnePlus 8T. If you did, please give this video a like, and I'll see you again in my next video.